So again, a really warm welcome to everybody. It's a delight to practice with others. And even if I have little mishaps here of the bell falling or whatever it might be, it's all good. It's all good. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the 5 faculties. And I'm inspired to do this for a few reasons, but one is this quote that we find in the suttas that reads, the Ganges River, this major river in northern India, the Ganges River slants, slopes, and inclines to the east. In the same way, a person developing and cultivating the 5 faculties slants, slopes, and inclines to nibbana. I like this idea, this use of the river simile. This idea of, rivers, of course, are natural and they flow one direction. It's not like some days they go one direction and other days another direction, but they always go the same direction. It does, and even though they are always going, in this case, to the east, it doesn't mean that they have the same character all the time. There may be times in which there's rapids, or there might be times in which it's a really slow, languid river that has a soft gurgling sound or something, or sometimes it might be a really loud, roaring rapid. Or there's even like parts of rivers that are eddies, kind of like just going around and around in circles. And rivers also, of course, they are meeting boulders and the river bank and maybe bridges, of course, too. So all these things that the river comes into contact with and then finds a way around. Sometimes it's beautiful and graceful, and sometimes it's splashing, and I don't know. So I feel really touched by this. The Ganges River slants, slopes, and inclines to the east. In the same way, a person developing and cultivating the 5 faculties slants, slopes, and inclines to awakening nibbana. So, in the same way, the Buddha's teachings are often follow this progressive path of practice that slants and slopes and inclines a certain way. And it doesn't mean it goes linearly all the time. It doesn't mean that we always go, clearly from step A to step B to step C, of course, right? Sometimes we jump around, or find ourselves going backwards a little bit, or in a spiral, but still our practice can become stronger and maybe have more depth, even though it might be clearly inclining in this particular way towards nibbana. And so, the Buddha used this expression as a way to teach, and I'm using it as a way to teach too, but we can get into trouble if we think that what's being used for teaching purposes means that things have to be exactly that way. Of course, things don't go cleanly and straightforwardly. Nothing in our lives unfolds precisely the way that we imagine it might, and I don't think anything unfolds exactly clearly in a linear way. But we might consider that the unfolding of practice, whether it's the 5 faculties, which I'll talk about a little bit, or maybe even just the bigger trajectory of the unfolding of practice of life, we can consider that it's kind of like gravity. In the same way that if you put water at the top of a slope, it flows downhill. In the same way, there's a way that our system wants to flow, if you will, towards greater and greater freedom, greater ease. Maybe for a river that's flowing to the ocean, for us, it's flowing to awakening, to some really deep peace and ease. And as we get a sense of freedom, as we get a sense of some openness or some ease, peace, and practice, then of course our hearts, our minds, our whole system, our bodies, they want to flow downhill and keep opening towards this greater peace and freedom. So this quote that I read includes this expression, developing and cultivating. A person developing and cultivating the 5 faculties slants, slopes, and inclines to nibbana. So what does this mean? Developing and cultivating. One way that I'm thinking about it is it's the opposite of inertia. Kind of inertia, right, is just sitting there without any vitality, without any movement, without any sense of possibility. And I'm using this word movement to mean maybe to point towards something that's possible, or like, okay, maybe our mind we're all over the place and we're not feeling particularly settled, but there's this movement of intention to be mindful, to be present. Or maybe it is that we are very mindful, and then there's a movement to seeing more and more subtle things, subtle phenomena with our mindfulness. So kind of this idea of developing and cultivating, one is not to be just going through the motions, but instead to be engaged. And this idea of developing and cultivating, if I believe that, and yes, I'm saying I believe, I'm using that as, actually I know this from myself, my own practice, that if our practice has some sincerity, and we're really engaged, and we feel encouraged with it, that there's a sense that somehow, yeah, this is a good thing, I'm going the right direction, then we don't necessarily need to be concerned with developing and cultivating or assessing, is this cultivating or is this developing? But those times when we might feel like we're stuck, or those times in which we might feel lost, or not even sure if we're like is this on the path or something like this, then it might be worthwhile to maybe consider some of the things that I'm going to offer about developing and cultivating. But you don't have to know exactly where you are or how far you've gotten, or to be measuring ourselves. Have I cultivated enough, or have I developed enough? The practice will unfold by itself. It will slant, slope, and incline towards awakening if we have a certain sincerity and engagement with it. However, I will say also that there can be some advantages to learning about cultivation and development, some of the stages that can unfold. One is to help us perhaps if we're feeling stuck, or to help us do a little bit of an assessment. We have to do this carefully, right? Sometimes our inner critic just grabs onto that and goes to town with it, and that's not what we want. But there are some advantages to identifying where we are in practice and where we are in cultivating or developing. If we understand that there's this movement, so that we can open to what we believe is the next phase, so we can open to it a little more fully. Often what's going to arise next in our practice, we get hints of it. There's a flickering of it, or a intuition of it, a feeling of it, a sense of it, like whatever is going to happen next. And if we know that that's something that's a deepening of practice or developing of practice, then we might align ourselves with that. Otherwise we might be dismissive of this new thing that's arising. But we have to be very careful. I have to be very careful We don't want to create the conditions in which we are straining and striving and trying to make something happen and then pouncing on whatever we think the next thing might be. And we certainly don't want to spend a lot of time measuring ourselves, but to be patient and to allow our own practice to slant, slope, and incline towards awakening. So tonight, as I mentioned, I'd like to talk a little bit about developing and cultivating the 5 faculties. But first, maybe I'll say that for me, the 5 faculties, I don't know, they just, like, the sound of them didn't seem quite so interesting. Before, I had a real kind of appreciation, like how they really come alive in one's practice. And I have to say now, I don't know, I have a certain love and appreciation for them, that there's tremendous beauty in the way that they come alive and interact. I don't know, I just feel very touched by them. And I use them to help guide my own practice, both in the big picture of my slanting towards more and more freedom, as well as, maybe a moment-to-moment practice. But before I'll say that, I'll say one other thing, is that maybe you're like me, and that the 5 faculties, it just doesn't sound so interesting. So what are they? They are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. They sound like a nice thing. There's nothing off-putting about them. And many of the elements are in the Eightfold Path. Faith isn't there, and we don't have exactly wisdom there, but certainly energy, mindfulness, and concentration are in the Eightfold Path, and in that same order. Maybe it's the word faith that's there, but I will, and somehow maybe in my mind also, maybe you're like me, I thought, well, the 7 factors of awakening, right? That somehow seemed more juicy, more exciting. It has the word awakening in it. It has 7. Clearly more is better, right? 7's got to be more than 5. And the 7 factors of awakening has joy and happiness in it. I mean, what's not to like? So I just offer this as the 5 faculties. Now I have this, even though I kind of gave them a short shrift, is that the right expression, earlier in my practice, I've really grown to really appreciate them, and I have this real, this real warm spot in my heart for them in some kind of way. So I just offer that as a way to consider, maybe to revisit the 5 faculties if you have earlier kind of been dismissive of them. So the 5 faculties: faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom. So it ends with wisdom. And there's so many ways that we can talk about the 5 faculties. This is part of why I love them. There's so many different avenues or aspects or ways to engage with them. I'm going to start with the last one, wisdom. And partly why is because of this quote here that's also in the suttas. Just as the footprints of all living beings that walk fit into the footprint of the elephant, and the elephant's footprint is declared to be their chief by reason of its size. So they're saying that the elephant footprint is the chief footprint just because it's the biggest. It's amazing the things you can find on Google these days. So I Googled the size of an elephant footprint. 19 inches. They can get up to 19 inches. That is a big footprint. So, it's like 1.5 feet, right? 18 inches. So, just as the footprints of all living beings that walk fit into the footprint of the elephant, and the elephant's footprint is declared to be their chief by reason of its size, so too, among the steps that lead to enlightenment, the faculty of wisdom is declared to be their chief for the attainment of enlightenment. Kind of a little bit of wordplay here between footprints and steps. But I like this idea of these really large elephant footprints being able to, being the chief, and the faculty of wisdom is the chief also. Somehow comparing it to elephant footprints, in my mind, ties us back to ancient India, ties us back to the time of the Buddha, when maybe noticing elephant footprints was something that was an ordinary thing to do. Me living here in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2020, I don't see very many elephant footprints, but I like things like this that kind of tie me back to the time when not only were there elephants, but also there was no pavement, right? Of course. So every time an elephant walked, there was a footprint. So in the same way, maybe every time there's some wisdom, there's some residue. It has an impact. So too among the steps that lead to enlightenment, the faculty of wisdom is declared to be their chief for the attainment of enlightenment. And what are the steps that lead to enlightenment? The faculty of faith, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration. And it also includes in this the faculty of wisdom is within wisdom. So some way that we might consider then the 5 faculties is as a way to help create wisdom, help to cultivate wisdom, to create the conditions in which wisdom might arise. And in this tradition, wisdom is seen as the gateway to liberation, is the way to greater peace, to awakening, to enlightenment. And wisdom is a faculty that we all have, and it's a number of ways that we can think about it, but one is the faculty to discern or to distinguish, to tell the difference between, in this case, between what's helpful and what's not helpful. Helpful for awakening, helpful for finding greater ease. I'll say a little bit more about that, but I want to point out the Course here that wisdom, it doesn't require book learning or doesn't require study. So in that way, we would say it's different than just knowledge. But instead it's this wisdom, and often things that are have some real wisdom, and a person who's really wise is not necessarily somebody that can spout off facts or sutta passages or something like that, but it's a person that can find a way forward, no matter what's arising, including a way forward is just to recognize that it's not clear to me what the way forward is. And it just, my phone, I'm telling it to, what is it, I put it on, I forgot what it's called, to be silent or something like this, but somehow me and my phone don't always agree, so my apologies for this. So but wisdom is this capacity to have a sense, maybe even if it's not clear, but the capacity to, this is the way forward. A way forward, maybe it's not even the way forward. So it doesn't require a fountain of knowledge, but it's developing this natural capacity. And this development of wisdom allows us to have a different type of seeing the way forward, in which things are revealed or discovered or maybe realized. So when wisdom is cultivated, there's a sense of, rather than our figuring it out or probing deeply or trying hard to understand what is there, we bring ourselves to a place where we allow experience to show its nature. It's more about our creating the conditions in which the way forward is able to be seen, shows itself. So it's less that we're out there trying to figure it out, and more that it becomes known. And then we start seeing as wisdom as this development, the development of wisdom as having this type of seeing, we start seeing the underlying building blocks. So not only do we start to see the way forward a little bit more clearly, but we start to see the underlying building blocks through which we build this conventional world in which we live in. That is this conventional sense of self that we have, the sense of who I am or who I need to be. We start to see the building blocks of these underlying roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. And of course, as long as those roots are still there will be the sprouting of plants that are born from these roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. So a kind of a cultivation of wisdom maybe starts as just seeing the obvious ways forward. Then there's a way in which we are helping to create the conditions in which there's less figuring it out the way forward, but a way in which it becomes known. The way forward is, we might say, revealed, realized. And then we can start seeing even more, we could see the underlying building blocks of the way that we're creating a conventional sense of self, the ideas of who I am and who I need to be or who I should be, or all these ways in which we try to build a sense of self, as well as we see these underlying roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. So there's this movement of wisdom that's being cultivated and developed. And then this seeing, we might say an understanding, that happens in this way allows a deep letting go. That is seen in some radical way that the impermanent, inconstant nature of phenomena, of all of our experiences, seeing in a radical way that all our ideas and concepts, that including ideas and concepts about ourselves, are just that, ideas and concepts. That is, they're insubstantial. They're just thoughts. They're events in the mind. And then seeing in a radical way that the suffering, the difficulty, the dukkha, and I'm using this word suffering in a really broad way to include even the most subtle sense of things not being quite right. So seeing in a radical way the stressfulness or the suffering that's integrated or enmeshed in the very way in which we are interacting with our experience or interacting with our environment, in the way that we see, hear, and think. And when we see these things in this radical way, impermanence, not self, suffering, then there's letting go just naturally happens. There's an understanding that it just doesn't make sense to be holding on. And then when this letting go is deep enough, it brings this tremendous freedom. And even if it's not deep enough, even all letting go brings a little bit more freedom. And so but there can be a letting go that's really deep, that the attachments are all let go, there's a release of them, And then they might come back, but now things are different. Now we know that we have as a frame of reference, as something to compare with, or things are different. Having tasted the certain amount of letting go, knowing that that's possible, then we don't hold on in quite the same way before. So we have this sense, this feeling, this experience of freedom. Becomes a reference point that throws everything else into highlight. And we start to see the ways in which we are holding on. Very subtle ways. It makes possible to see that clinging isn't what we really want. So this idea of slanting, sloping, inclining towards awakening, and that the chief of the 5 faculties is wisdom, and we can see how the cultivation of wisdom starts with just being able to distinguish or discern a way forward. And it grows and cultivates and develops until that it supports a really radical letting go, which supports freedom. So then we might consider, well, what is cultivation and development of 4 other faculties? Diana, you've only talked about 1. What would it be like if we consider, or we have an inquiry, what would it be like if each of those faculties were to support this cultivation of wisdom? That is there a way in which faith, we could also use the word confidence, both confidence in the practice and confidence in ourselves, is there a way in which that can support this seeing more and more clearly in such a way that it supports letting go? Can we see that as a cultivation and development energy, effort? Is there a way, of course, we have to apply a certain amount of effort in order to do this practice, in the beginning, just to get ourselves to sit on the cushion. But is there a way in which the effort can be applied such that it supports the letting go, such that it supports the development and cultivation of wisdom? Mindfulness. In the beginning, mindfulness is just bringing our attention to the present moment and sitting and knowing that we're sitting in some way, right? Just moment, and then maybe again another moment, and then again another moment. But is there a way in which mindfulness can be cultivated such that it supports letting go, such that it supports the development of wisdom? And concentration, this gathering together, this getting settled, this non-distraction. Is there a way in that there can be a bit more gathering, a little bit more non-distraction? Not that we have to have a laser focus, but the way that we can feel integrated and maybe combined, all the different aspects of ourselves. And can we consider development of that as a way that moves towards allowing more letting go and more cultivation of wisdom? So that our practice can slant, slope, and incline towards awakening. Yeah, so there's something about this that I don't want to give the impression that developing and cultivating has to be an active thing that we are, requires striving, straining all the time. Of course, in the beginning, there needs to be a certain amount of effort, but this is the beauty of all 5 of these faculties. Cultivating and developing requires some application, but then there's a way in which it just starts to slant, slope, and incline towards greater freedom. And this is part of the art of practice, is to notice when there needs to be a little bit intentional cultivation and when we can just allow it to flow. So the 5 faculties, maybe I'll, in a subsequent talk, in another talk, develop them a little bit more. But may you find the ways in which you practice whatever way you're practicing that supports some letting go, which supports more freedom, which allows you to have more freedom in your life, but of course also more freedom in the lives of others, so that you can, when you meet them from this place of greater freedom, it helps support them finding greater freedom. Thank you.